Hello, my name is Maylene. When I got pregnant, my parents said I brought shame to the family, so they forced me to marry a man they called homeless, as punishment. What they didn't know was who he really was. But that wasn't the worst part. They erased me from photos, took my name off the prayer list, told neighbors I'd run off with a stranger, and while the world clapped for their grace, I was sleeping on a mildewed mattress behind a gas station, 7 months pregnant, wondering how much more they'd take before I disappeared completely. Why would your own family rather shame you than love you? Do you want to know what happened next? I knew the room was going to feel colder the moment I stepped into it, but I didn't expect the silence to bite harder than the spring air seeping through the cracked window. My hands rested over the small swell beneath my sweater, not to shield it, but because it gave me something to hold that still belonged to me. Everyone else in that room seemed determined to strip me of everything else. Dad paced by the fireplace like he was delivering a sermon only he understood. His dress shirt, always tucked too tight, strained against his chest every time he turned sharply. My mother, Velma, sat on the edge of the couch, legs crossed, eyes stuck on the rug, like she was praying the floor would open and swallow her up before anyone asked for her opinion. And Rhiannon, my perfect sister, she leaned against the wall with her arms crossed and a smirk curling under her lip, like she was watching a rerun of a show she'd already spoiled for everyone. "Say something," Dad finally snapped, his voice cracking the room open. "Anything, Malin. This is your moment to explain." "There's nothing to explain," I answered, steady. I had rehearsed it in my head all day, how I wouldn't beg, wouldn't cry, wouldn't lie. But saying it out loud still made my tongue feel dry. "It's my baby, that's all," Rhiannon scoffed. "Don't play the martyr. You weren't this silent when you let whoever it was do this to you." Velma flinched like she'd been hit, but still said nothing. Cowardice disguised as neutrality. Dad pointed toward my stomach with 2 fingers, like a judge convicting a criminal. "This is not just your mistake. This stains our name, our family. You think your choices don't affect anyone else?" "I didn't ask you to fix it," I said, and I hated how quiet my voice came out. "I didn't ask you for anything." He stopped pacing. That was my mistake, assuming he wanted dialogue. He didn't. He wanted submission. "Then you have no place in this house." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed hard, like a door slammed behind you that you don't realize locks from the outside. Velma stood, walked out of the room, and returned with a black trash bag. Inside, my toothbrush, a half-used bottle of prenatal vitamins, a maternity lotion someone had given me for Christmas, and the Bible I hadn't opened in years, pages torn where I'd once underlined verses in anger. She didn't look at me, just placed it at my feet and said, "Pack the rest yourself, but you'll leave tonight." The rest happened fast. They didn't even argue about it. I wasn't allowed to be part of the meeting that decided my future. My absence, apparently proof of my guilt. 2 hours later, after I'd sat at the kitchen table, long enough to forget what comfort felt like, Rhiannon emerged from Dad's office and leaned over the counter like she was about to offer me a ride to the grocery store. "We've arranged something," she said. "Someone." She pulled out her phone, scrolled without shame, and flashed a photo of a man I didn't know, tall, disheveled, face half-shadowed. "His name is Ezra. He lives out behind the gas station near Route 9. You'll marry him by the end of the week." I blinked, not out of shock, but out of disbelief that she said it so plainly. "You're serious," she laughed. "Serious as your due date. Look, you brought this on yourself. Dad's doing what he thinks is best, for the church, for the family name. You should be grateful. For being disposed of like garbage? For being given a chance to not destroy what's left." That night, they blocked my access to the family phone plan, deleted my email account. I wasn't allowed to post or contact anyone, not that I had anyone to call. Church friends had stopped returning my texts weeks ago. Silence doesn't always come with violence. Sometimes it just grows like mold, slow and thick. They gave me 7 days. But by morning, I knew I wouldn't last that long. I packed in silence. My room looked smaller than I remembered. It smelled like furniture polish and old perfume. Memories I used to think were warm now felt like dust choking my chest. The sun hadn't fully risen when I stepped onto the porch, barefoot because Velma said I didn't need to wear shoes where I was going. I stood there for a moment, waiting for someone, anyone, to say goodbye. No one did. The neighbors were already awake. Mrs. Kim watered her front bushes and looked away the moment our eyes met. Mr. Grant opened his garage and then shut it again when he saw me. As I walked down the sidewalk, the wind caught the edge of my too-thin jacket. My fingers tightened around the trash bag strap digging into my shoulder. My stomach ached, not from the weight of the child I carried, but from the weight of what I was leaving behind. Or more accurately, what I was being forced to carry forward without a trace of where I belonged. A woman on her porch whispered to her husband, "She used to be such a nice girl." I didn't look back. What was there to see? I didn't cry when the front door shut behind me, but I did later, when they told me who I was marrying. By the time I arrived at the church, my feet were sore, and my thoughts were too tangled to untangle. 5 days had passed since I walked out of my childhood home, and every one of them had chipped away something I hadn't realized I was still holding on to. Pride. Hope. Maybe even a sliver of belief that someone, anyone, might stop this train wreck. They didn't. I hadn't seen Ezra yet. Not even a photograph this time. Just a vague description. He's quiet, doesn't cause trouble, and knows better than to ask questions. That came from Rhiannon, of course, who spoke about the whole situation like she was arranging a charity drop-off, not a wedding. The church didn't look like it had when I was a child. Or maybe I was seeing it differently now. Less sanctuary, more stage. The ceremony was set up in the back garden where the youth group used to hold Easter egg hunts. A few folding chairs lined the patchy grass. There were no decorations, no music. Just a folding table with 2 mismatched chairs for the signing and a wrinkled cloth that looked like it hadn't been pressed in years. Rhiannon handed me the dress she said she found at a local thrift store. "Be grateful," she muttered, eyes on her phone. "Some people don't get a second chance." "It's too small," I said, holding it up. She barely looked up. "You're not here to be comfortable. You're here to be fixed." No one helped me change. I used the church bathroom, the one with the flickering light and peeling wallpaper. The dress clung too tight across my chest and gapped oddly at the seams. I couldn't zip it fully in the back. I wrapped a thin cardigan over it and called it enough. When I stepped out, Velma gave me a once-over and turned away. Luther didn't even look. The pastor, someone I hadn't seen in years, stood near the makeshift altar with his hands folded neatly. He gave me a small nod, more out of obligation than welcome. "Let's begin," he said, like we were starting a budget meeting. Ezra appeared then, walking toward us from behind the church. He wore a button-down shirt, slightly wrinkled but clean, slacks that didn't quite fit. His shoes were worn at the heels. His face was unreadable, not cold, just blank. He didn't look at me, didn't offer a hand or a word. I couldn't decide if that made it easier or worse. We stood side by side while the pastor read a passage about humility and reconciliation. I heard none of it. I only remember the way the sun hit the back of my neck, how my toes curled in the 2 tight flats I'd borrowed from Rhiannon, and the single fly buzzing persistently between us. "Do you take this man?" the pastor asked, voice steady, "to be your husband?" "I do," I said, because that's what was expected. Because no wasn't an option that day. Ezra answered the same, low and even. There was no kiss, no announcement, no applause. "You may return to your lives," the pastor said, not even trying to fake warmth. Luther nodded once. Rhiannon took a photo on her phone, just one, no poses, and muttered something about having proof. I was handed a fake flower halfway through the ceremony, plastic petals slightly melted at the edges. I still don't know why. No one offered congratulations. There was no cake, no reception, no small talk, just silence and a few birds chirping like nothing odd had just taken place. Velma walked away without a glance back. Rhiannon gave me a look that said, "You asked for this," even though we both knew I hadn't. Luther spoke only once more. "It's done. Don't contact us unless it's about the baby, and even then, think twice." After everyone left, I sat alone on the folding chair for a while, staring at the grass. I didn't feel married. I didn't feel anything, really. Not sad, not angry, just vacant. Ezra returned with an old pickup truck, the kind that made more noise than motion. He didn't speak, just opened the passenger door and waited. I climbed in. There was no luggage, just the trash bag I'd carried out of the house, and a small cracked plastic bag someone had shoved under the passenger seat. Inside it, a prepaid phone that didn't work, and a few travel-sized toiletries. I didn't ask where we were going. I figured I'd find out soon enough. The drive was quiet, not awkward, not heavy, just absent. Like we were two people occupying the same vehicle, but entirely different universes. The road stretched on, trees passed. I looked out the window and realized I hadn't seen my own reflection in days. Maybe that was on purpose. I didn't expect Ezra to make small talk. He kept both hands on the wheel, his eyes steady on the road, like this was just another errand. Grocery store, hardware shop, drop off the unwanted girl. My hand rested against my belly. The child inside me shifted gently, almost like a reminder I wasn't alone, even if every sign around me said otherwise. Eventually, the road narrowed. We turned off the main strip and passed a series of rusting fences and a shuttered gas station. A weathered sign swung overhead in the breeze, barely holding on by its last bolt. Ezra pulled into the gravel beside it. He didn't say anything as he cut the engine. He didn't look at me, just stepped out and walked toward the trailer parked behind the building. I stayed seated for a moment longer, staring at the dashboard. "My marriage started without a promise," I whispered. "Only instructions." I stepped out of the truck, one hand still resting against my stomach. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes with a tired kind of finality. The air smelled like oil and rust, a leftover scent from a life that had shut down years ago. The trailer ahead looked like it had survived more storms than seasons. It leaned slightly to one side, its windows stained yellow around the edges. There was no porch, no welcome mat, no sign that this space had ever known warmth. Ezra didn't speak. He just unlocked the door, pushed it open, and walked inside like he was showing a stranger a motel room he didn't own. I followed, though my legs resisted. Inside, it was smaller than my old bedroom. A narrow mattress lay crooked on a metal frame against one wall. No pillows. The ceiling had a long crack running from one corner to the middle. There was a single chair beside a hot plate on the counter and a cup with 3 plastic forks sitting inside it. No curtains, no table, no clock. I stood in the center, trying to figure out where my presents could fit in a place that clearly hadn't been made for more than one. "Where's the lock?" I asked. Ezra looked at me, not startled, just steady. "There isn't one." He grabbed a bottle of water from the counter, placed it near the mattress, and walked out without another word. The door clicked shut, not locked, but somehow that silence felt heavier than any deadbolt. I didn't unpack. I didn't sit. I leaned against the edge of the counter and stared at the single dim ceiling bulb that hummed faintly above me. I didn't cry. I'd already spent too many nights mourning the loss of people who were still breathing. My eyes moved to the edge of the mattress, where a stain had discolored the seam. It reminded me of something, a couch in a lawyer's office. I hadn't meant to think about it, but there it was. 2 weeks earlier, the office smelled like dust and paper. The fan rattled behind the receptionist's desk. Velma sat beside me, hands folded, like she was preparing to pray, but never got around to it. She hadn't said a word in the car, or when we walked in, or when the lawyer slid a stack of documents in front of me. You're just signing to ensure the child's future is handled properly, he'd said. His voice was soft but clipped, like he'd done this enough times to know which phrases worked best on girls like me. I remember flipping through the papers, legalese everywhere, words like waiver, assignment of guardianship, irrevocable. I'd asked one question. Does this mean I don't have rights anymore? Velma finally spoke then. She didn't look at me. She just fixed her eyes on the plaque on the desk that read David Langford S. Quarters and said, "Good mothers know when to step aside." It wasn't a request. It was a sentence. I signed. Because at that point, I still believed they were doing this to protect me. Because I thought fighting meant more doors would close. Because I didn't know yet that I was already on the other side of them. I snapped back to the present as a drop of water landed on my hand. I looked up. There was a slow drip from the ceiling. Rain must have started, though I hadn't noticed when it began. It was almost dark now. The inside of the trailer had no clock, no sense of time. I found a blanket shoved behind the chair, thin and scratchy, but better than nothing. I laid it over the mattress and sat down, careful not to lean too far to one side. The springs creaked, but held. Ezra hadn't come back. Maybe he was outside, maybe not. I didn't hear the truck leave. I didn't check. I laid back and stared at the ceiling, letting the soft sound of dripping water set a rhythm I hadn't asked for. My body felt heavy, but my mind was alert in a way that kept me from sleep. The kind of awareness that grows when you know no one's coming to check on you, not out of malice, but because they've already decided you don't matter. I pressed my palm against my belly. The child inside me shifted slightly, as if offering company in the void. They think I'm broken, I whispered into the dark, but broken things are still sharp. At some point during the night, the rain had stopped. I must have drifted off for a while, though I couldn't say when. There was no clock, no ticking, no sunrise pouring in through the yellowed windows, just the soft creak of metal under me and the faint scent of wet dust clinging to the ceiling. I opened my eyes slowly, my back stiff from the uneven mattress, and my body unsure whether rest had happened at all. I sat up, pulling the blanket around my shoulders like it could shield me from more than just cold. My mouth was dry, but I didn't move. I listened for the sound of footsteps or the truck. Nothing. Stillness held its breath around me. Then a knock. Soft. Twice. I hesitated, then stood and opened the door just enough to see Ezra's hand extend toward me. He didn't look at me, didn't say a word. In his palm was a small paper plate with 2 slices of toast and a hard-boiled egg, perfectly peeled. I blinked. By the time I stepped fully into the doorway, he was already walking away, the screen door of the gas station creaking open as he disappeared behind it. I sat at the edge of the mattress, staring at the food like it might come with a condition. I waited a full minute, then I took a bite. It was dry, no butter, no salt on the egg, but it was warm, and it hadn't been left out of pity or duty. I could tell. It was the kind of gesture that didn't need a name. I didn't eat like I was starving. I ate like I was remembering how to let something into my body that wasn't fear. The day stretched long. Ezra came and went without a word, the truck coughing out its usual rattle as it pulled away around noon. He returned with a few canned goods and bottled water, stacking them on the small shelf beside the hot plate. Still no questions, no explanations. By afternoon, the heat had pushed through the thin trailer walls. I opened the small side window to let in some air, and that's when I saw her. A woman, older, gray sweater, sensible shoes, walking along the edge of the lot, carrying a tote bag of what looked like groceries. She paused near the fence, her eyes catching mine. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. But she didn't look away either. For a second, I thought she might come closer. Ask something, say something. She didn't. Just kept walking, disappearing down the road, like I hadn't been standing there at all. The trailer felt quieter after that. I cleaned slowly, not because it needed it, though it did, but because I needed to touch something and make it better, even if just a little. I wiped the counters, rinsed out the cup of plastic forks, and refolded the threadbare blanket. I tried the burner phone again. Still nothing. No bars, no messages, no hope. I'd lost track of how many days had passed since I last heard my name spoken without judgment. That night, Ezra didn't return. I waited until dark, then later. I stepped outside once, thinking maybe I'd hear the truck's engine or see headlights in the distance. But the night was still, thick. The gas station sat silent, its windows like blind eyes, refusing to acknowledge me. I went back inside, lit the small lamp near the mattress, and sat in the chair. There was no note, no sign of where he'd gone. Just the memory of toast on a paper plate, and silence that now felt more like absence than mercy. By morning, still nothing. I considered leaving. The thought wrapped itself around my chest like a wire pulled tight. But leave to where? I had no ID, no phone signal, no address memorized that hadn't already erased me. Walking out into nowhere felt no different than staying here. At least this place had walls. By nightfall, a storm rolled in. The wind pushed hard against the side of the trailer, whistling through the edges of the window frame. Rain started slow, then hard. I shoved the mattress to one corner as a slow leak appeared in the ceiling. The drip pattered steadily onto the linoleum, forming a shallow puddle that crept under the chair legs. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and moved beneath the small metal table near the window. It wasn't comfort, but it was cover. Lying there in the dark, I realized something. I wasn't scared the way I used to be. The fear wasn't of being alone or forgotten. It was the fear of being seen just enough to be abandoned. Again. They'd already done that. Ezra may have left, or maybe he was nearby. Either way, his silence had been a kind of presence that now, in its absence, revealed itself as a strange form of care. And yet, I didn't cry. I'd done that already. In lawyers' offices, in locked bedrooms, on sidewalks where neighbors looked through me. Grief had become a quiet rhythm inside me now, not a scream, but a slow echo. I pressed my back against the floor, the metal table pressing low above me, the rain providing the only soundtrack. I thought about Velma, about the way she had once brushed my hair when I had a fever, about the way she looked at the floor when she told me to sign away my right to be a mother. I had already lived through the funeral of their version of me, and I had survived it. The air inside the trailer had grown still by early dawn, warm from the storm's leftover humidity. My body was stiff from curling beneath the metal table, but I didn't move right away. There was something strangely familiar about waking up to silence. Like it had become my default alarm clock, absence ringing louder than presence ever could. Then I heard the door. Not loud, not rushed. Just the soft sound of a key turning and the hinge moaning open like it hadn't been used in years. I sat up slowly, the blanket slipping off my shoulder, and saw a pair of polished boots step inside. Ezra. Except, not Ezra. His clothes were clean, crisp. A pale button-up tucked neatly into dark jeans, no wrinkles, no stains. His beard trimmed down, his hair combed like he'd walked out of a business meeting, not the woods. He held a keyring in his left hand and something heavy-looking in his right, maybe a wallet, maybe a phone. But I didn't process that part. I was too busy staring. "Who are you?" I asked before I could stop myself. He looked me straight in the eye and didn't blink. "You weren't supposed to see this part of me," he said, "but now you should." He walked past me, calm, placed the keys on the shelf near the hot plate, like we lived here by choice. Then he turned back toward the door and said evenly, "We're not staying." There was no explanation, no apology. And yet, for the first time since I'd been dropped at that trailer, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't ask for answers. I wasn't sure I wanted them. I simply stood, grabbed my bag, and followed. He drove a black SUV. Not new, but well kept. Quiet engine, spotless interior. The contrast from the rusted-out pickup was enough to make me check the passenger door twice, just to be sure it was real. We didn't speak for a long while. He drove with one hand, the other resting on the wheel, tapping slightly to a country station, humming low from the radio. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't anything, just motion. Eventually, we turned off the highway and onto a winding road lined with dogwoods and faded mailboxes. Suburbia crept into view. Not luxury, not poverty. That middle space people call stability, even if it's one layoff away from collapse. He pulled into a driveway where a small modern house sat tucked behind a row of hedges. Clean, quiet, neutral. He got out first, walked around, and opened my door. I stepped out slowly. The air cooler here, lighter somehow. "This is yours?" I asked. He nodded. "It was. It can be again. Or something new can be." He didn't wait for a reply. Just walked toward the front door and let it swing open. I followed. Inside, it smelled like cedar and something herbal. Fresh. There were no photos on the walls, no signs of family, just soft furniture, muted colors, and windows that let the light in without asking too much in return. I didn't ask what he did or where he'd been. I knew better now than to look for answers where survival had been the priority. Instead, I sat on the edge of the couch and let myself exhale. Hours passed. He moved around quietly, unpacking a few things into the kitchen, adjusting a thermostat, checking the fridge. I stayed in the living room. No words were exchanged, but I didn't feel discarded. Late that afternoon, the laptop on the coffee table pinged. Ezra opened it, clicked once, then closed it again. He handed me a small folder without comment. Inside was a printout, screenshots of a Facebook post. Rhiannon. Her words were as sharp as I remembered. "She married a stranger for food and shelter. I hope she's not starving." There were likes, comments, laughing emojis. Someone even tagged the old church group. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated. A voicemail, no caller ID, but I didn't need one. "Sweetheart," Velma's voice started, syrupy in a way only guilt could sweeten. "People are talking. Maybe you should take a break from social media. Delete anything that might make us all look worse." Us. Not her. Not Dad. Not Rhiannon. Us. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the neatly trimmed yard I hadn't known I needed. Then I said, clear enough for him to hear, "I need a suit, and a place to work." Ezra didn't even turn around. "It's already being arranged," he said. That night, I didn't mourn what I'd lost. I planned for what I'd no longer tolerate. 1 week later, I stood outside the courthouse in Harrisburg, the morning sun catching on the glass facade like it was daring me to step inside. The building loomed, sterile and official, but I wasn't here to beg. I was here to begin. My heels clicked against the marble floor with each step I took, firm but not rushed. I wore the navy blue suit Ezra had arranged for me, fitted, nothing dramatic. My hair was tied back, makeup minimal. I didn't want to be remembered for how I looked. I wanted the record to show that I came prepared. Inside courtroom 2B, the air smelled like floor polish and old coffee. A clerk called my name, mispronounced it slightly, but I didn't correct her. Not anymore. I was done handing out grace-like candy. I was there to contest a document, one they'd convinced me to sign 2 weeks before they kicked me out. A waiver, a legal form that stripped me of parental rights and handed control of my future child to the very people who had treated me like a stain. The judge glanced over the file, then at me. "You're requesting a reversal of the waiver based on coercion?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you're filing for formal legal emancipation from your parents?" "Yes." There was a pause. I didn't fill it. Flashbacks don't usually come like film reels. They hit in fragments, in sounds, in words you wish you could forget but never really do. Rhiannon once stood in front of an entire youth group and delivered a speech about abstinence and integrity. "Values," she called it. I sat in the front row that day, 14 years old, believing every word. What no one else knew was that just months earlier, she had been flown to another state for a quiet procedure, a private clinic, paid for by Dad. But that wasn't my business back then. They made sure it wouldn't be anyone's business now. I filed the statement. I walked out of the courtroom, and when I reached the sidewalk, I exhaled like I hadn't in years. Later that afternoon, I met with a lawyer Ezra had connected me to. Her office was in a small building above a bookstore. No plaque on the door, just a quiet woman in her early 50s who offered me tea before asking for my name. "I'm not here to destroy anyone," I said, sliding an envelope across the desk. She opened it carefully. Inside were screenshots, timestamps, and every document Velma and Luther had pushed in front of me under the guise of doing what's best. She scanned the pages, then looked at me. "You know, most people don't gather this much. They rely on memory." "I've already learned what memory costs when it's not on paper." She nodded. "It's time your side of the story had a file cabinet." Before I left, I handed her one more sheet, Rhiannon's college scholarship application. She'd claimed 300 volunteer hours at the local clinic. I knew the clinic director. I knew the logs didn't match. I didn't say it to be cruel. I said it because I was done being silent. By evening, the story had begun to spread. Not mine, but theirs. Online whispers grew teeth. "Estranged daughter files civil separation from respected church family," read one headline. I didn't share it, didn't comment, but I read the reactions. Rhiannon posted something within hours. "Some people are allergic to peace." Velma texted me that night. "How could you turn this into a circus?" She didn't say my name. She didn't ask if I was okay. Just blamed me for the spotlight they'd earned. I sat at my desk, next to a neat stack of manila folders, and labeled each one without hesitation. What they did. What I know. What they'll never take again. The silence around me wasn't empty anymore. It was structured, like scaffolding. I wasn't building revenge. I was building a boundary. The courthouse hadn't handed me freedom, but it gave me something better, clarity. And that was a start. The next morning came with a dull gray sky and an inbox full of venom, the kind that hid behind polite tones and church emojis. I hadn't even made coffee yet when I saw the post. It was Rhiannon's, of course. A neatly curated image captioned with something that sounded like it belonged in a framed quote at a suburban gift shop. "Family comes with mistakes, but we don't delete each other." Underneath it, a photo from my wedding, or rather, what used to be my wedding. I had been cropped out entirely. Just Ezra stood in the frame, eyes lowered, hands at his sides. The background had been lightened and filtered to look almost hopeful. Below it, she had added a Bible verse, something about mercy and new beginnings. I stared at it, jaw locked, heat crawling up my neck. The comments flooded in. "So proud of you for taking the high road." "God sees your heart, Rhi." "This must be so hard for your parents." And then, from someone I used to sit next to in choir practice, "You're better than this, Maylin." They had tagged me too, not by name, just to her. I was a ghost they couldn't stop dragging into their narrative. I didn't comment. I didn't argue. Instead, I opened a blank white square in my photo editor. No caption. Just 3 words across the middle, in plain black font. I remember everything. I hit post. By late afternoon, the digital storm was thick with speculation and Sunday school sympathy. And that's when I heard the envelope slide under my door. I bent down, picked it up, and immediately recognized the careful cursive on the front. Clara Winsley. There was no return address, just a note inside. "I saw them back then. I should have spoken. If you still want truth, meet me." No instructions, no apology, just truth. I found her later that evening at the cafe, 2 blocks down from my apartment. She sat at a window seat with a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Her coat hung neatly over the chair beside her. She looked the same, older than when I was a kid, sure, but still composed in that way women of her generation had perfected. Quiet, watchful, never hurried. I'm sorry, she said, before I even sat down. Why now? I asked. She placed a flash drive on the table. There was a cleanup day, she said. The church parking lot. I was recording volunteers for the bulletin. I caught something. I didn't mean to. I took the drive, not sure what to expect. When I got home and opened it, the video played in shaky frame. Luther in the church hallway, face red, hands clenched. His voice rang loud and clear. That child is dead to me. She's not family anymore. I didn't flinch. I didn't rewind. I uploaded it. My caption was simple. This is how we were taught to forgive. It took less than an hour. The shift was subtle at first. Likes, reposts, comments. Then came the apologies. The people who once whispered now suddenly remembered how uncomfortable they'd felt, but hadn't said. We didn't know. We should have asked. I'm sorry we stayed quiet. Truth has a way of growing legs when you least expect it. The next morning, a knock came at 9 hours sharp. A man in a brown coat handed me an envelope with practiced indifference and walked away before I could ask anything. Inside, civil complaint papers. Luther and Velma Greaves versus Malin Rhodes. Claim neglect of elder care. Claim moral abandonment, filed under Pennsylvania's filial responsibility law. Attached were glossy photographs of Velma leaning on a cane at the pharmacy, Luther in bed with a humidifier behind him, and, of course, Rhiannon wiping a tear at Sunday service. They had staged their suffering. The hashtag started trending by lunch. Family first. Ungrateful daughter. Honor thy parents. A local radio station even quoted a church leader. It's tragic when children forget who raised them. I didn't go online to defend myself. I went live. My face bare, hair pulled back, no music, no filter. There is no law, I said, looking into the camera, that demands you fund your own erasure. There is no honor in pretending people didn't harm you just because they share your blood. I paused. My conscience is clear. Is yours? Then I ended the stream. The next notice I received wasn't a message. It was another court summons, with my name finally spelled right. 10 days later, the courthouse steps felt different beneath my heels. Not heavier, not lighter, just real. I had walked those same tiles when I filed my petition. Back then, there was still some hesitation, the kind you carry when you're not sure if people will listen. But this time, I wasn't here to be heard. I was here to be recorded. The courtroom was cool and still, like always. No buzz of chatter, no eye contact, just seats filled with faces pretending to be neutral, and a judge looking like he'd rather be somewhere else. I sat alone. Ezra offered to come, but I told him no. Not because I didn't want him there, but because this wasn't his fire to walk through. Velma and Luther sat 3 rows behind me, flanked by their attorney and someone from the church. Rhiannon was there too, of course. Designer bag, expensive blouse, face painted in manufactured sorrow. The judge cleared his throat. We'll begin with the plaintiff. Their lawyer stood and began listing grievances. Emotional distress, familial rejection, and an alleged obligation I had failed. There were buzzwords thrown around: moral duty, familial tradition, abandonment. I let them talk. When it was our turn, my attorney stood and said calmly, "We'll be presenting evidence of coercion, misrepresentation, and sustained emotional harm directed at my client." He played the video first, the one Clara had recorded without realizing it. The courtroom watched as Luther screamed into a hallway years ago. That child is dead to me. She's not family anymore. Then came the documents, the waiver I signed under pressure, the financial transactions masked as support, but really used to cut me out, and emails from Velma about doing damage control. Rhiannon took the stand, swearing she had no knowledge of manipulation. Her voice cracked when she said, "We were just trying to help her get on her feet." Velma cried, dabbing her eyes without smearing her makeup. Luther didn't speak, just stared forward, jaw locked, like it was the only thing keeping him upright. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a closing statement, I nodded. I stood slowly, my palms dry, my heartbeat even. They filed this lawsuit to punish me for surviving. That's the truth. They say it's about love and duty, but it's not. It's about power, about who gets to control the story. I scanned the room. Nobody met my eyes. I'm not here to convince anyone I'm perfect. I'm not even here to ask for understanding. I'm here to say I'm not their prisoner anymore. Not legally, not emotionally. Then I sat down. The judge was silent for a moment, then spoke clearly. This court finds the parental claim for financial obligation invalid under the presented context. The defendant's legal independence is affirmed. No gasps, no drama, just a ruling. And yet, in that still room, it felt louder than anything they had ever shouted at me. I left the courthouse alone, walked 3 blocks to a quiet cafe, ordered tea, and sat by the window while the rest of the world moved on like nothing had changed. But something had. That evening, the Haven Foundation hosted its first annual gala in a modest event center just off 3rd and Jefferson. The place was warm, filled with quiet lights, and the kind of people who didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. Ezra was there, off to the side. Clara, too, seated near the back with a pin on her jacket that read, "I see you." I wore a black dress, not because I needed to, but because I chose to. Simple neckline, sleeves to the wrist, and a soft pin that had the initials of my unborn child stitched quietly into the fabric. When I stepped up to the mic, the room hushed without needing to be asked. "I'm not here to tell a sad story," I said. "I'm here to reclaim one." A few heads nodded. This foundation isn't about vengeance. We're not collecting sympathy. We're investing in reclamation for every woman who was told she had to apologize for her own breath. Applause wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was steady. True. After my speech, I walked down the steps from the stage, back into the crowd. On one of the tables near the entrance, an envelope sat alone. I opened it without ceremony. Inside was a single photo, my wedding day, cropped again. Only Ezra, no me. Tucked behind it, a name tag from that same day. Bride, not invited. Clara walked over, picked it up gently, and folded it in half. "You don't need that anymore," she said. And I believed her. 2 weeks passed with quiet rhythm. The kind of rhythm that doesn't demand attention, but makes its presence known in the smallest ways. Like how I stopped checking my phone every morning, or how the sound of my own heels in the office hallway no longer startled me. At the Haven Foundation, the light from the windows felt softer now. Or maybe I was learning how to let it in without squinting. My calendar was full. Meetings with new clients, budget reviews, a proposal to open a second shelter in the county. My desk wasn't just where I worked. It had become a place where I rebuilt the world on my own terms. That morning, I logged into a secure banking portal, scrolled through transaction records, and clicked "Confirm" on a wire transfer. The account was labeled Private Trust. Ezra had set it up months ago without asking. No fanfare, no conditions. The total amount, enough to cover the overdue mortgage on my parents' house and the full balance on Luther's medical bills. When the banker asked over the phone, "Would you like to include a message with the transfer?" I said, "No, just proof of payment." I didn't sign my name. There was nothing left to explain. Some debts are paid not because they're earned, but because carrying them starts to feel like dragging someone else's coffin on your back. Later that day, I sat in my car for 10 minutes after pulling into the parking lot near the courthouse annex. The sun hit the windshield just right, casting small flickers across the dash. I reached into the glove box, pulled out my phone, and tapped on a voicemail that had been saved under a new contact. Final chapter. Luther's voice filled the cabin, gravelly and uneven. "I was wrong, Malin, all of it. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to hear me say it. You were right, and I'm sorry." He paused before adding, "I thought I was protecting our name, but I didn't protect my daughter." I listened to it once, then again, not because I needed it, but because I had the right to. I didn't cry. I didn't press delete either. I just let it stay there, like an old photo in a box you don't open often, but also can't bring yourself to throw out. That weekend, I drove out to the edge of the neighborhood where I grew up, not to the house itself, but a park nearby where Dad used to take me when I was little. There was a fountain there, now dry and rimmed with frost. The air smelled like leaves and worn-out swings. I sat on a wooden bench overlooking the empty playground. No kids, no laughter, just wind and time. From my coat pocket, I pulled out a small letter I'd written to myself the week after the court ruling. The envelope was unsealed, the paper creased and worn. I unfolded it and read in silence. "You're not trying to prove you were hurt anymore. You're proving you survived it. That's the difference between reopening a wound and letting it scar. One needs attention, the other needs space." I folded it again, walked over to the nearest trash can, and dropped it in. I didn't need it anymore. Forgiveness isn't about who deserves it. It's about who no longer has to carry the weight of someone else's sins in their pocket every day. It's not about opening the door again. It's about choosing not to stand guard in front of it anymore. I took one last look at the frost-covered fountain, then turned and walked toward the car. Ezra was waiting at the curb. No words, just a small nod and the engine running. I got in. We drove for a few miles without saying anything. Then he glanced at me, one hand resting on the wheel, and asked, "You okay?" "I'm not sure that's the right question," I replied, watching the trees blur past the window. "But I'm here, and I'm still me." He smiled. Not a wide one, but the kind that told me he understood more than I'd said out loud. They tried to end my story before it began, I thought, as the city faded behind us. I didn't fight them, I just kept writing. And I would keep writing, page by page, on my terms. Sometimes surviving is louder than fighting. I didn't win because I screamed the hardest. I didn't get justice because I played the victim. I got here, on my own terms, because I stopped asking permission to exist. And if you're watching this right now, maybe there's something inside you that's been waiting to be acknowledged too. Maybe your story was edited by someone else, cropped, silenced, rewritten. Maybe you were made to feel like your truth was too heavy to carry forward. But I'm here to tell you, it isn't. And you're not. Your healing doesn't need to be perfect. Your peace doesn't need to be loud. And forgiveness? It's not for them. It's what happens when you choose to walk forward without dragging their shadow behind you. So let me ask you, have you ever forgiven someone without letting them back in? Have you ever stood your ground quietly and felt stronger than ever? I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story spoke to you, even just a little, drop a 1 below. But if it didn't resonate, that's okay too. Let me know why. Let's talk about it. Let's grow from it. And if you believe in the power of real stories, raw, human, and unpolished, go ahead and subscribe to this channel, because there are more voices waiting to be heard, more stories to be told, and maybe the next one will be yours. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next story.